Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick video about 3 of the best cameras released here just about halfway through 2016, at least in my opinion. We've got the Sony CyberShot RX10 Mark III on the far left, $1,500 for this 1-inch censored beast that has a revamped piece of Carl Zeiss glass that now takes you from 24 to 600 millimeters. In the center, we've got the Panasonic Lumix ZS100, also referred to as the TZ100 in other markets outside of the US, priced at $700 also based around a 1-inch sensor with a 10x lens. And then last but not least, the Sony A6300, which is arguably one of the most important cameras of the year in terms of its price to performance ratio with regard to interchangeable lens cameras that have APS-C sensors. And that is because at $1,000 US body alone, $1,150 for the kit you're looking at here, you get some fantastic APS-C 24 megapixel stills, as well as Super 35 4K video in a very compact, if not completely unmatched body, unlike anything else on the market. It does have a tendency to overheat, something you won't find with these two cameras, but remember, you have an APS-C sensor here, considerably larger than the 1-inch sensors you'll find in each of these. Also, another thing I want to point out, right now in terms of availability, you won't have a problem finding either of these cameras, but the RX10 Mark III, the newest of the 3 you're looking at here, is back ordered until July, and that is because Sony does have issues with their supply chain due to an earthquake that happened not too long ago. It has created a shortage component, or rather a component shortage, excuse me. So as a result, the RX10 Mark III is back ordered, and even in some instances, I've seen Best Buy, which doesn't really surprise me, overpricing the A6300 and bumping it up by $100 on both the body and the kit version, which, last I checked, I'm not sure that that's even legal to do. I mean, of course you can, but as an authorized retailer, I was under the impression that they are supposed to stick to MSRP, in other words, the manufacturer's suggested retail price. But all of that aside, what you're looking at here, in my opinion, does represent right now the best of 2016 when it comes to DI. Yes, a lot of things are on the horizon. Nikon has a lot of stuff coming out, Canon, some, and Sony still has more in the bank, no question about it. But when you look at what all 3 of these cameras can do, we really had nothing like any of them prior to their release here in 2016. The RX10 Mark III, yes, the 1 and 2 were both very impressive bridge cameras, but now we have 24 to 600 millimeters. Yes, it did give up the neutral density filter. It did give up, or rather, basically, Zeiss put together a variable aperture lens, still very fast, f2.4 to f4, which I think is still fantastic. I think a very good compromise, especially when you recall or remember that the first and second gen only had an 18 to 200 millimeter piece of glass. So I think Sony really has made a phenomenal camera here. It is $1,500 US. A lot of people find that to be too expensive, but for the people that have been waiting for this, the price really isn't even a question. It's a must-have, and I understand why. And I've addressed that in updates about this camera. It really is an amazing tool, both for still and video purposes. The Lumix, same story. You've got a camera that's very close to the RX100 in terms of physical size, a little bit larger, not as robust when it comes to build quality, but a 1-inch sensor, 25 to 250 millimeters of range in this Lumix, and even though it doesn't have the fastest lens on Earth, and it does get some criticism that, like a piece of glass, I still find myself using it more frequently than the RX100 Mark IV simply because of its versatility. Granted, it doesn't have as good an EVF. It does have a touchscreen. It doesn't have an articulating LCD on the back, but a touchscreen is still something that I know many shooters desire. Also, no overheating on 4K video capture, which, if it is even relevant to you in the slightest, is going to sway you. Also, the fact that it's less expensive than the RX100 Mark IV should not be overlooked. So I think Panasonic pushing the envelope, much like Sony did here with the RX10 Mark III. And then, again, the A6300 really setting a whole new bar for interchangeable lens cameras. And that's because what we've got here is an affordable, really competent still and video machine. Granted, it has some video overheating issues. It is a still camera first, though, and I will reiterate that in all of my videos. But one of the best electronic viewfinders I have ever seen outside of the A7R Mark II or the A7S Mark II, which are well over $3,000. Well, the A7S Mark II is $3,000, but body alone, $3,200 for the A7R Mark II. So you're getting an amazing 120 frame per second viewfinder here. You can take it down to 60 if you want to eat less battery, an articulating screen, a microphone input, no headphone jack, unfortunately, so you'll have to monitor on screen, but still the versatility of this camera is amazing. The autofocus system, pretty much the best in the business right now, especially if we're going to speak strictly about mirrorless. It has the most phase detection points on any camera. I believe it's 425. Of course, still has contrast in there. It's a hybrid autofocus system, but 120 frames per second, 1080p video as well. If you're interested in high-speed capture, you've got it. And again, Super 35 as well as regular 4K readout, of course, with pixel binning on this camera. No in-body stabilization. A lot of people wish that it was there, but that's what the A7R Mark II and A7S Mark II are all about. If you're looking for in-body stabilization, Sony wants you to step up to the full-frame game. In the E-mount APS-C lineup, you rely on lenses for stabilization. But the other great thing is that now the E-mount has matured enough that you have pretty much a very wide array of glass to choose from. And even though FE seems to be growing faster than APS-C E-mount lenses, of course, they are compatible going both ways. So you can use an FE lens on here and get the added benefit of more range, something like this beast, which is 70 to 200. And yes, the faster version is still, or rather has not yet hit the market. It is going to be twice the price. That'll be worth it to professionals. I'm not sure how much to amateurs and hobbyists, but the point is, throw it on here, you have even more range than the 70 to 200 that G glass has to offer, because you do have the 1.5 crop factor to take into account, since it's not a full frame sensor. But again, this was really just about where we're at in the digital imaging world here. Just about, we're not in June yet, but almost there. So we're almost halfway through this year. And right now, what you're looking at, in my opinion, are three of the best cameras that money can buy, and you simply cannot go wrong with any of these. They suit different consumers. For some consumers, they'll want all three. Some consumers will want two of them. I think this makes a great pairing. I think this makes a great pairing. I think having all three in some instances will be what's best for some people, because I feel that there's always a case can be made for an interchangeable lens system. And if you want to keep things light, really there is nothing better than the A6300 right now that isn't full frame. And when it comes to, 1-inch sensor-based point-and-shoot cameras, these two are really the best out there outside of the RX10 Mark IV, which with its limited focal range, I can't put into this conversation, forget that it isn't a product here in 2016. In fact, I'm waiting for the RX100 Mark V, and we'll see what Sony has in store for us when that camera does eventually hit shelves. But right now, again, this is the best of class of 2016 here midway through the year, and I will reiterate with confidence that you can't go wrong with any of these cameras. In terms of which is right for you, it all comes down to budget and what you're trying to do. My favorite personally right now is the RX10 Mark III, because there's really just about, there are very few things that I find myself unable to do with it as a photographic tool, and that is an impressive thing to be said. Granted, it's actually the most expensive camera of the bunch here. It should actually be the most versatile for that reason, but then again, the A6300 can easily become a pricier DI solution when you start pairing glass with it. Keep in mind, with the A6300, you also now have the benefit of far greater compatibility with legacy glass from other brands, even autofocus being a possibility with the correct adapters employed. So that's a really big benefit that Sony always touted, but never could really deliver enough for pros to get on board. Now, professionals can use any glass on E-mount cameras and shoot just about anything with auto with the right adapter. So that's a critical thing if you're still on the fence and coming from Canon, Nikon, whatever it may be. You've got Leica glass. You can get on board with E-mount with adapters and expect full performance capability. Again, no in-body stabilization, but at $1,000, you simply cannot find the feature set that the A6300 has to offer from any manufacturer. And that's what all three of these cameras are about. You will not find anything on the market that does truly match up. In this case, the FZ1000. Yeah, great camera. It's been on the market for 2 years, but it doesn't have the reach, build quality, weather sealing, and in my opinion, just overall optics. I mean, even if I were to shorten this lens to 400 millimeters, it would still be the superior camera. And don't get me wrong, I love the FZ1000. It's a great value right now. If value is what you're after, that's what you should be looking at. Panasonic hasn't announced a successor. At some point, hopefully they will. When it comes to the Lumix in the middle, again, nothing like it, literally. I've compared it to the RX10 Mark IV, but really it's not a fair comparison, simply because so much more flexibility. And the A6300, like I keep reiterating, nothing else on the market. If people are going to say, what about the GH4? Come on, this is ridiculous. The GH4 is an old product, still very competent, don't get me wrong, but not in the same league as the A6300. Granted, video overheating aside, this is the best hybrid camera of 2016 that's interchangeable, lens-based, and has a large sensor. A DSLR type sensor is what I should say. One last point of interest for those of you wondering about rolling shutter, people really need to chill out with this. They talk about rolling shutter with the A6300. You know, unless you pan like a monster, the rolling shutter is not an issue, at least in my experience, and I think most professionals and reviewers out there will concur. In fact, the rolling shutter tests that I see online are the most absurd things ever. People panning left to right, 3 seconds. I mean, what are they expecting? And I'm not saying that anything should be a brick house on this, or there should be wobble and distortion from the rolling shutter effect, but expectations need to be realistic. And when people do those sort of pan tests, I just wonder what's going on in their mind. When are you ever going to pan that way? And in the instances where you would you be relying on a $1,000 body? That's the question you really have to ask yourself. Same applies to these two. Rolling shutter, really not a big deal at all. RX10 Mark III, I really don't see any rolling shutter issue whatsoever. So I'm not denying that the A6300 has a rolling shutter issue. It's just the talk about it is absolutely absurd. So that's why I wanted to point that out as a final point regarding all three of these cameras. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Hit that like button. Feel free to subscribe as usual. Later.